blood dripped from her fingertips, a stark contrast to the pure white fur pushing through her skin. For 5 agonizing years, Freya swallowed poison to suppress the beast within. Now, cornered under the unforgiving gaze of the Alpha King, her ultimate secret was clawing its way into the moonlight. Rain lashed against the heavy, leaded glass windows of the Ironhold fortress, but inside the scullery, the heat was suffocating. Freya wiped a soot-stained forearm across her brow, her muscles aching from hours of turning the massive iron spit. The scent of roasting boar and sharp winter spices filled the cavernous kitchens, yet underneath the savory aromas lingered the bitter, metallic tang of fear. Tonight was the decennial tribute. For 5 years, Freya had survived in the lowest dregs of the Ironfang pack by being entirely unnoteworthy. She was the girl in the ashes, the silent servant with dirt smudged across her pale cheeks, clad in a burlap tunic that hid the curves of her 23-year-old body. To the rest of the pack, she was a dud, a wolf who had never experienced her first shift at 18, cursed with the weak blood of a human omega. In a medieval world governed by fang, claw, and brute strength, being wolfless was a fate worse than death. It meant you were property. But Freya was not empty. She was a vault holding a deadly secret. Every morning before dawn, she snuck into the apothecary's stores to steal dried silver leaf, crushing it with toxic wolfsbane and the crushed roots of the weeping willow. She brewed it into a vile black tea and forced it down her throat. The concoction felt like swallowing shards of glass. It burned her esophagus, poisoned her bloodstream, and kept her inner wolf violently suppressed in a state of perpetual, agonizing slumber. She did this because her wolf was not ordinary. It was white. In the annals of their history, the white wolves were a myth wrapped in a curse. They were the legendary conduits of the moon goddess, born with a commanding aura that could force even a ruling alpha to their knees. A century ago, a paranoid king believed a prophecy that a white wolf would usurp his bloodline, sparking the Great Purge. They were hunted down, slaughtered in their sleep, and burned at the stake. Freya's mother had been the last known survivor, living in hiding until the Ironfang warriors raided their village. Her mother had shoved a silver dagger into her own chest to hide her white fur in death, using her final breath to command Freya to run, to hide, and never, ever let the beast out. Freya, stop daydreaming and scrub the hearth, you worthless half-breed. The sharp crack of a riding crop against the wooden table made Freya flinch. She turned to see Lady Beatrice, the daughter of Lord Reginald, the current alpha of the Ironfang. Beatrice was draped in emerald velvet, her corset stitched with gold thread, her auburn hair arranged in elaborate braids. She looked like a queen, and she intended to become one tonight. The king arrives within the hour, Beatrice sneered, stepping closer, her heavy leather boots crunching on the stone floor. If I see a speck of soot on your face when you serve my wine, I will have the guards throw you into the fighting pits. Do you understand? Yes, my lady, Freya murmured, keeping her eyes glued to the floor. Submitting was a reflex she had honed over half a decade, though her suppressed wolf snarled against the magical chains in her mind. Good. And stay away from Cedric, Beatrice added, her voice dropping to a venomous hiss. A lowly scullery maid has no business making eyes at the captain of the guard. He pities you, nothing more. Freya didn't care about Cedric, though the young captain was the only one in Ironhold who occasionally offered her an extra crust of bread or a kind word. Her only concern was survival. But Beatrice's cruelty was legendary, driven by her desperate ambition. King Kaelin of the Obsidian Court, the supreme Alpha King of the Northern Territories, was riding to Ironhold to collect the tribute and, rumor had it, to seek a mate. Kaelin was a warlord of terrifying repute. They said he had conquered the rebel packs of the west with nothing but a broadsword, and a wolf so monstrous it cast a shadow over entire battlefields. His arrival had sent Lord Reginald into a frantic panic, terrorizing the servants to ensure the fortress was immaculate. A loud, resonant horn blew from the watchtower, its deep note vibrating through the very stones of the castle. The king had arrived. Freya felt a sudden, sharp cramp in her abdomen. She gasped, dropping her scrub brush. The wolfsbane tea she had drunk that morning felt weaker than usual. Or perhaps the ambient energy of the approaching Alpha King was seeping through the stone walls, stirring the ancient blood in her veins. Her inner wolf, dormant for so long, scratched at the doors of her consciousness. No, Freya thought frantically, gripping her stomach. Not now. Sleep. You have to sleep. Get up, the head cook barked, shoving a heavy silver tray of goblets into Freya's hands. To the great hall, and keep your head down. Trembling, Freya pushed through the heavy oak doors of the kitchen, stepping into a nightmare that would end her 5 years of silence. The great hall of Ironhold was a spectacle of medieval decadence. Massive chandeliers forged from black iron hung from the vaulted ceilings, blazing with hundreds of wax candles. Tapestries depicting bloody battles of ancient wolves lined the stone walls, and a roaring fire dominated the far end of the room. Long oak tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, exotic fruits brought from the southern ports, and overflowing chalices of dark spiced wine. But the opulent setting was overshadowed by the sheer, suffocating pressure of the aura radiating from the high table. Freya kept her head bowed as she moved silently among the guests, but even without looking, she could feel him. King Cailan sat beside Lord Reginald, looking less like a guest and more like a dark god who had descended to pass judgment. He was clad in armor of blackened steel over a tunic of midnight blue. A heavy cloak made of shadow-bear fur spilled over his broad shoulders. When Freya dared a fleeting glance, she saw a man with rugged, sharp features, a jaw covered in dark stubble, and a pair of piercing, storm-grey eyes that seemed to strip away every secret in the room. Beside him, Lord Reginald was sweating profusely, trying to boast about his pack's wealth, while Lady Beatrice leaned across the table, offering the king her most seductive smile. Cailan looked utterly bored, swirling the blood-red wine in his goblet. "Your fortress is well defended, Lord Reginald," Cailan's voice rumbled. It was a deep, gravelly sound that resonated in Freya's chest, causing her suppressed wolf to whine and pace against its mental cage. "But I care little for stone walls. I care about the strength of the wolves within them. The Western rebel packs are gathering strength. I need soldiers, not merchants." "Indeed, Your Majesty," Reginald proclaimed loudly. "The Iron Fang pack boasts the most fearsome warriors in the realm. We have purged our ranks of the weak. Only the strong remain." Cailan's eyes lazily scanned the hall, landing briefly on the servants. "Is that so? I smell fear. I smell the stench of hidden things." Freya's blood ran cold. She backed against a stone pillar, clutching her empty serving tray to her chest. The wolfsbane in her system was rapidly burning away. The Alpha King's natural aura was a dominant force, an ancient magic that demanded submission and truth. It was a well-known fact that in the presence of the Alpha King, a wolf could not hide its true nature. "We harbour no secrets, my king," Reginald said nervously. Beatrice, sensing an opportunity to assert dominance and rid herself of a nuisance, suddenly stood up. Her eyes locked onto Freya with malicious glee. "My father speaks the truth, Your Majesty," Beatrice announced, her voice echoing through the silent hall. "However, there is a stain upon our floor. A creature that claims to be of our pack, yet refuses to shift. She claims to be a late bloomer, but she is 23. I suspect she is nothing but a human spy, hiding among us to steal our secrets." Every eye in the great hall turned to the shadows by the pillar. Freya's breath caught in her throat. "Bring her forward," Cailan commanded, his voice devoid of emotion. Two massive Iron Fang guards grabbed Freya by her arms. She didn't struggle. Struggling would only get her killed faster. They dragged her to the center of the room, tossing her roughly onto the cold, polished stone floor at the base of the dais. Her knees hit the ground hard, tearing her thin burlap skirt. "A dud?" Cailan leaned forward, resting his chin on his gauntleted hand. He stared down at her trembling form. "There are no duds in my kingdom. Only wolves, humans, or corpses. Which are you, girl?" I am just a servant, my king," Freya whispered, her voice shaking. The pain in her abdomen was escalating into a blinding agony. Her bones felt like they were vibrating. The suppression potion was failing entirely under the crushing weight of Cailan's dominant aura. "She lies!" Beatrice sneered, stepping down from the dais to stand over Freya. "Look at her. She smells of bitter herbs and ash to mask her human stench. She is a leech. The law of the Obsidian Court dictates that any unshifted adult claiming pack protection must prove their wolf or face the executioner's block." Lord Reginald nodded eagerly. "My daughter is right. I should have dealt with her years ago." Cailan stood up slowly. He towered over everyone in the room. He stepped down from the dais, his heavy boots echoing like a death knell in the silent hall. He stopped inches from Freya, who was curled on the floor, gasping for breath as her internal temperature skyrocketed. "Shift!" Cailan commanded. It was not a request. It was an alpha command, laced with raw, ancient magic that forced obedience from every cell in a werewolf's body. I can't," Freya choked out, tears of sheer panic streaming down her face. If she didn't shift, Beatrice would have her beheaded as a human spy. If she did shift, the king himself would kill her for being a white wolf. "I will not ask twice." Cailan's voice grew darker, the air around him crackling with power. "Shift, or my guards will take your head right here on these stones." Beatrice smiled triumphantly, stepping back to watch the execution. Cedric, standing by the doors, took a step forward in protest, but another guard yanked him back. The Alpha Command hit Freya like a battering ram. The magic tore through the 5 years of toxic barriers she had built. The wolfsbane in her blood boiled, neutralizing in an instant. The beast she had kept buried in the dark, chained and starved, roared to life with a terrifying ferocity. It was angry, it was powerful, and it would not be suppressed any longer. A sickening crack echoed through the hall as Freya's spine arched backward against her will. She let out a blood-curdling scream that didn't sound human. Her hand slammed onto the stone floor, her fingernails elongating, turning into thick, razor-sharp claws that gouged deep tracks into the solid rock. "What is happening?" Reginald stepped back, his face paling. She is shifting." Freya's bones snapped and reformed in rapid, agonizing succession. But instead of the usual brown or grey fur of a common wolf, a brilliant, blinding light seemed to erupt from her skin. Pure, iridescent white fur burst through her torn clothes. Gasps erupted around the room. Guards drew their swords. Cailan froze, his storm-grey eyes widening in absolute shock. The transformation finished in seconds. Where the dirty, ash-covered scullery maid had been kneeling, a massive, majestic wolf now stood. She was larger than a normal female, her coat as white as fresh snow, glowing with an ethereal, moonlit radiance. But it wasn't just her colour that terrified the room. It was the suffocating wave of power that blasted outward from her. Freya's wolf didn't cower before the Alpha King. She stood tall, her icy blue eyes locking onto Cailan's grey ones, baring her fangs in a low, earth-shaking growl. "A white wolf," Beatrice whispered in horror, stumbling backward and tripping over her heavy velvet gown. "By the gods! Kill it! Father, kill the cursed beast!" The great hall erupted into chaos. The great hall erupted into chaos. A dozen Iron Fang guards drew their broadswords, the harsh scrape of steel ringing out over the panicked screams of the courtiers. Lord Reginald stumbled backward over his own heavy oak chair, his face entirely devoid of colour, while Lady Beatrice shrieked commands from the safety of the raised dais. "Don't just stand there, you fools! Take its head!" she bellowed, pointing a trembling, jewel-encrusted finger at the glowing beast in the centre of the room. Freya's wolf did not flinch. For 5 years she had been starved, poisoned, and buried alive in the darkest corners of her own mind. Now, standing under the flickering candlelight of the chandeliers, she felt an intoxicating surge of raw, unadulterated power. The white fur along her spine bristled like needles of ice. When 2 guards lunged at her with silver-tipped spears, she didn't just dodge. She moved with a blinding, ethereal speed that defied the heavy gravity of the medieval world. With a single sweep of her massive, snowy paw, she shattered the wooden shafts of their spears into splinters. She didn't bite. Her human consciousness was still tethered enough to abhor the taste of blood. But the sheer force of her kinetic aura sent the 2 armoured men flying backward into a table of roasted venison, scattering silver platters and crystal goblets in a deafening crash. "Hold!" The word tore through the great hall like a crack of thunder. King Cailan stepped forward, his storm-grey eyes locked entirely on Freya. He didn't draw his weapon. He didn't adopt a fighting stance. Instead, a strange, breathless awe softened the hard, warlord lines of his face. As he stepped closer, the suffocating, dominant aura he had used to terrorize the room suddenly shifted. The oppressive weight vanished, replaced by a scent that hit Freya's hypersensitive nose like a physical blow. Rain-slicked pine, ozone, and burning embers. Her wolf froze, her massive chest heaving. The aggression drained from her posture, replaced by a deep, ancient instinct. Mate. The realization struck her human mind with the force of a falling portcullis. The Alpha King of the Obsidian Court, the most feared warlord in the Northern Territories, was her fated mate. "A white wolf," Cailan murmured, his deep voice carrying perfectly in the sudden, terrified silence of the hall. He reached out a gauntleted hand, his eyes burning with a fierce, possessive fire. "The bloodline of Gévaudan. We thought your kind was eradicated during the Windsor Purges. Your Majesty, step away from the beast," Reginald cried out, clutching a gilded dagger. "It is a trick of the moon goddess, a curse meant to ruin our pact." "The only curse in this room, Reginald," Cailan said softly, never taking his eyes off Freya, "is your unfathomable stupidity." Beatrice, driven mad by the realization that her scullery maid had just commanded the attention of the king she intended to marry, lost her mind. She snatched a heavy, iron-wrought crossbow from a stunned sentry standing near the hearth. The weapon was loaded with a bolt dipped in pure, concentrated wolfsbane, a lethal dose for any lichen. "She is a monster!" Beatrice screamed, her face twisted in ugly, venomous jealousy. She hoisted the heavy weapon, resting it on the edge of the high table, and pulled the trigger. The heavy thrum of the bowstring snapped through the air. Freya, disoriented by the overwhelming influx of the mate bond and the lingering exhaustion from the shattered suppression spell, was too slow to react. But Cailan was not. With a monstrous roar that shook dust from the vaulted ceilings, the Alpha King moved. He didn't shift into his wolf, but his speed was utterly unnatural. He threw his massive body between Freya and the dais. The silver-tipped, poisoned bolt struck him dead in the center of his shoulder, biting deep into the gap of his blackened armor. Cailan grunted, staggering back half a step, but he didn't fall. His hand snapped up, gripping the shaft of the bolt, and with a sickening crunch, he tore it out of his own flesh. The silver hissed against his blood, sending plumes of foul-smelling smoke into the air. But the king's eyes only burned darker. "Treason!" Cedric, the captain of the guard, shouted, immediately drawing his sword and pressing it to Beatrice's throat. The young captain's face was pale with shock, but his duty to the king overrode his loyalty to his cruel lords. Freya let out a distressed, high-pitched whine, her massive white head nudging Kaelin's uninjured side. The smell of his burning blood drove her wolf into a frenzy of protective panic. "I am fine, little one," Kaelin growled softly, resting his heavy, blood-stained hand gently between her white ears. The touch sent a jolt of electricity through Freya's spine. Then Kaelin turned his gaze toward the high table. The warmth vanished, replaced by the chilling, merciless glare of the warlord of the north. "Lord Reginald," Kaelin's voice was deadly quiet, yet it echoed in the bones of every person present. "You harbour my fated mate as a slave in your ashes. Your daughter attempts to assassinate her, and strikes your king instead. The Treaty of the Northern Reaches is hereby dissolved." "Mercy, your grace." Reginald fell to his knees, weeping openly. "I did not know. She hid herself. The girl is a deceiver." "Captain Cedric," Kaelin commanded, ignoring the snivelling lord. "Arrest Reginald and Beatrice of the Iron Fang. Strip them of their titles, seize their lands in the name of the Obsidian Court, and throw them in their own dungeons until I decide their fate." "With pleasure, my king," Cedric replied grimly, signaling his loyal men to bind the screaming Lady Beatrice and her weeping father. Kaelin turned back to Freya. The adrenaline of the fight, combined with the sudden release of 5 years of magical suppression, was finally taking its toll on her. The brilliant light of her white fur began to dim. Her massive legs trembled, the stone floor spinning dizzily beneath her paws. "You are safe now," Kaelin whispered, dropping to one knee before the terrifying beast, completely ignoring his bleeding shoulder. He stripped off his heavy, shadow-bare fur cloak. "Shift back, Freya. Come back to me." The sound of her real name on his lips broke the last of her barriers. The white fur receded, melting into the air like morning mist. Bones cracked and realigned, and within seconds the great white wolf was gone. Freya collapsed onto the cold stone floor in her human form, naked, shivering, and entirely unconscious. Before her skin could touch the freezing stone, Kaelin caught her. He wrapped his massive warm cloak securely around her fragile frame, lifting her effortlessly into his arms. He held her tightly against his chest, a dark king holding a star he had just pulled from the ashes. When Freya opened her eyes, there was no scent of soot, no bitter taste of willow root on her tongue, and no suffocating heat of the scullery. Instead, she was enveloped in the scent of cedarwood, old parchment, and the lingering, magnetic aroma of rain and ozone. She sat up with a gasp, clutching the thick, crimson silk sheets to her chest. She was in a bed larger than the entire kitchen she had lived in for half a decade. A massive stone fireplace crackled merrily across the room, casting a warm, golden glow over walls adorned with rich tapestries of the Obsidian Court. "Careful. Your body has been at war with itself for a long time." Freya whipped her head toward the sound. King Kaelin was sitting in a high-backed leather chair near the fire. He was no longer in his blackened armor. He wore a simple white linen shirt, unlaced at the collar, revealing the thick bandages wrapped around his shoulder, where Beatrice's bolt had struck him. He looked tired, yet terrifyingly handsome in the firelight. "Where am I?" Freya's voice was hoarse. It had been days since she had spoken a full sentence. "You're in my personal chambers at Blackwood Keep, the heart of the Obsidian Court," Kaelin answered smoothly, setting down a goblet of wine. "You have slept for 3 days, Freya. The healers had to flush the remnants of the wolfsbane poison from your liver. If you had kept taking that concoction for another month, it would have stopped your human heart. Freya looked down at her hands. The calluses from scrubbing floors were still there, but her skin was clean. The perpetual ache in her joints was gone. For the first time since she was 18, her mind was quiet, her inner wolf resting peacefully, purring in contentment at the proximity of their mate. "You didn't kill me," she whispered, looking back up at him. "The law says white wolves are an abomination, a threat to the crown." Kaelin scoffed, a bitter, dark sound. He stood up, crossing the room with a predator's grace, and sat on the edge of her bed. The mattress dipped under his immense weight. "History is written by terrified men, Freya," Kaelin said, his eyes tracing the delicate lines of her face. 100 years ago, a weak Alpha King feared the power of the White Wolves because they could not be controlled by standard Alpha commands. They were the moon goddess's true chosen, meant to keep the kings in check. So he ordered the Windsor Purges. He called you monsters to justify his own cowardice. Freya clutched the silk sheets tighter. "My mother, she died to hide me. She told me the world would hunt me if they knew. Your mother was trying to survive in a broken world." Kaelin reached out, his large, rough hand gently tucking a stray lock of her dark hair behind her ear. His touch sent a cascade of warm shivers down her spine. "But the world is changing. The Western rebels, led by Lord Silas, are marching on our borders. They have bred beasts of dark magic. My armies are vast, but we lack the ancient, pure magic needed to break Silas's spellweavers." Kaelin leaned closer, his gaze intensely vulnerable. "I didn't just find my mate in that dining hall, Freya. I found the salvation of my kingdom. A white wolf's aura can nullify dark magic. You are not a curse. You are the cure." Tears pricked Freya's eyes. She had spent 5 years convincing herself she was a monster, a freak of nature that deserved the ashes. To hear the most powerful man in the continent tell her she was their salvation felt like waking up from a lifelong fever dream. "I don't know how to be a queen," she admitted softly, a tear escaping and trailing down her cheek. "I only know how to hide." Kaelin caught the tear with his thumb, his expression softening into an expression of profound devotion. "You will never have to hide again. I will tear down anyone who looks at you with anything less than absolute reverence. You will learn to rule, and I will be right beside you. The girl in the ashes died in Ironhold. Now, you are Freya of the Obsidian Court." He leaned in, capturing her lips in a kiss that tasted of rich wine and unbreakable promises. It was gentle, yet possessive, a vow sealed in the quiet warmth of the firelight. As his lips moved against hers, Freya felt the last remnants of her fear burn away. The bond between them clicked into place, an unbreakable chain of magic and loyalty. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer, finally embracing the wild, beautiful beast she had buried for so long. She was no longer a victim of her bloodline. She was its weapon. And together with Kaelin, they would paint the history of the Northern Territories in a new, brilliant light. The girl who had once choked on ashes and poison was no more. Freya rose not as a hidden secret, but as the White Queen of the Obsidian Court. Beside Kaelin, she forged a new era, turning the very curse that had hunted her into the ultimate symbol of their reign. Her white fur became the realm's brightest beacon, proving that the deepest power cannot be starved, only truly awakened.